Now it's pursued wherever you go. You can be chased down the street and harassed by professional photographers, and there's no actual privacy laws to give you any protection.
Maximus's angular face is now lost in the fog of Nana Glen. At 61, the man who once had the entire world kneel before him in the Roman arena, the brilliant John Nash with his beautiful soul, or the proud Captain Aubrey, has chosen to shed his armor forever. Russell Crowe no longer needed Hollywood's fake applause. He was facing the truth about the scars he had created for himself. From the pinnacle of fame to the tragedies that tore his family apart, the legendary Gladiator finally spoke about the cruel price of arrogance. Why did a hero of the screen become a failure in real life? Let's take a look at the untold story behind a legend. Every legend begins in obscurity, and for Russell Ira Crowe, it began on April 7th, 1964, in Wellington, New Zealand. His parents were caterers for film crews. While other children grew up on playgrounds, Russell grew up under the kitchen tables of dusty film sets. He watched the stars through their legs, saw them sweat, saw them exhausted, and witnessed their most raw anger behind the camera. It was those days of film crew meals that honed Russell's keen observational eye and his rough working-class instincts. When he was 4 years old, his family moved to Sydney, Australia. If New Zealand was his cradle, then Australia was the forge that sharpened his edges. Russell was never a well-behaved child by conventional standards. Before the age of 14, he had to change to 9 different schools, always an outsider, always the new kid facing scrutinizing glances on the school grounds. He was forced to learn to be prickly. Loneliness did not break him. It turned him into a survivor with a strong instinct for self-preservation, someone willing to use his fists to defend his own territory. Then, at age 10, fate struck. During a heated football game, Russell was hit hard and lost his front tooth. A normal child would have been taken to the dentist immediately, but Russell was not. For the next 10 long years, he accepted living with a gaping hole every time he smiled. It's laughable that a young actor full of ambition would despise superficial glamour to the point of refusing to get a replacement tooth. He wanted the world to accept him with his most naked imperfections. It wasn't until he was 25, when a director had to pay out of his own pocket and warn him, "I can't film you if you don't fix that mouth," that Russell finally relented. His youth was a series of constant transitions. Russell dropped out of school, took the stage name Russ LaRock, performed in cheap bars, and slept on old couches. He lived on the small change he earned from busking, fearless of conflict, fearless of failure. It was this unstable, gritty life that shaped the Russell Crowe the world was about to be amazed by. Dangerous, masculine, and utterly reckless. In 1997, while Hollywood was asleep with its glossy, pretty boy faces, Russell Crowe appeared like a direct punch. In L.A. Confidential, his role as police officer Bud White was not acting, but an invasion. Audiences held their breath as they watched a man who didn't need to try hard to exude the danger of a predator cornered. He didn't come to ask for a place, he came to take it. This explosion came at a very high price. Russell began to believe that the world owed him obedience. On set, he wasn't just an actor, he wanted to be the director. By 1999, with The Insider, Russell pulled off a crazy transformation. At age 35, he gained 20 kilograms, dyed his hair white, and aged himself 2 decades to become Jeffrey Wigand. Those scenes were the pinnacle of dedication, but behind the scenes, it was a war zone. Russell became notorious for yelling at the crew, rewriting scripts on the spot, and publicly humiliating anyone who disrupted his emotional frequency. Arrogance began to take root even amid the praise. And then, in 2000, the biggest explosion in modern cinema history occurred. Gladiator. When Russell donned Maximus's armor, he conquered not only the Roman arena, he conquered the entire planet. Maximus Decimus Meridius was the symbol of absolute power, and the whole world bowed down before him. The Oscar was inevitable, but it also added fuel to the fire of self-importance burning in Russell's chest. He began to act as if he really were a general with the power of life and death. There is a costly story that people still whisper about his sky-high ego at that time. At the BAFTA Awards ceremony, when his acceptance speech was cut short due to broadcast time, Russell did not hesitate to corner a powerful television producer against the wall, grab him by the collar, and utter heavy threats. To him, no one was allowed to edit the words of a king. At this point, Russell Crowe could no longer distinguish between film and real life. He walked the red carpet with a cold, challenging gaze that made millions of people both fascinated and terrified. Money, fame, and power had built an impenetrable fortress around him. Russell stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood, lonely and arrogant, believing himself immortal. He had no idea that the flames of his pride were silently burning the last bridges to peace. The biggest storm was yet to come, and it would not start with his enemies, but with the women who entered his life. On the set of Proof of Life, Russell met Meg Ryan. At that time, Meg was not just an actress. She was a muse, a symbol of sweetness and perfection in the eyes of the public. The secret affair between a cocky gladiator and America's national sweetheart exploded like an atomic bomb, flattening Meg's 10-year marriage to Dennis Quaid. The audience didn't see romantic love, they saw destruction. Russell entered Meg Ryan's life not to build, but to take over, leaving behind a pile of ashes of ruined reputations. However, just as Russell Crowe's name was being splashed across the tabloids, this man made a move that stunned even the most informed observers. He returned to Australia and found Danielle Spencer, the woman who had quietly stood by him since before he was famous. In 2003, on his 39th birthday, Russell held a wedding that is still considered a bastion of redemption. He spent millions of dollars to build a private chapel on his Nana Glen ranch. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was Russell's desperate attempt to rewrite the script of his own life. He wanted to prove to the world that the wild man had been tamed, that the gladiator had finally chosen family as his anchor. But life isn't a movie where he could yell, "Cut!" whenever he made a mistake. During this period, Russell reached the pinnacle of his acting prowess with A Beautiful Mind and Cinderella Man. Ironically, while he made millions weep over his portrayal of the devoted husband and self-sacrificing father on screen, behind the camera, his ego had swollen to frightening proportions. He began to take the obedience of others for granted. Outbursts of rage in luxury hotels and verbal abuse directed at film crew members became part of his dark legacy at the time. Russell Crowe at that time was like a man walking a tightrope between two abysses. On one side was the glory of a cinematic genius. On the other was the collapse of an arrogant personality. He secured a home with Danielle and their children, but forgot that love requires understanding, not control. He was a great general in the eyes of the audience, but a cold stranger in the very home he had built. The biggest storm was still forming, and this time no church or millions of dollars could prevent it from tearing apart the perfect facade he was trying so hard to maintain. In 2005, Russell Crowe's crown began to rust. On a hot summer night at the Mercer Hotel in New York, the arrogance of a king and the heartache of a father collided violently, creating a stain that no film award could wash away, simply because of a technical glitch that prevented him from calling his wife in Australia. Russell threw the phone at the hotel employee. The image of the Gladiator being escorted by police, hands cuffed, head bowed low, became a symbol of a personality imploding from within. This was not merely a fit of temper. It was the collapse of a man who realized that while he could command an entire army on set, he was powerless to connect with his own family. The sound of the phone crashing that night was the death knell for his golden era in Hollywood. The following years were a series of desperate attempts to maintain his status. Russell still delivered heavyweight performances in American Gangster and Les Miserables. The harsh role of Police Chief Javert seemed to be a reflection of him at that time, rigid, dogmatic, and always chasing a ghost of the past. Audiences saw his perseverance, but they also saw his exhaustion. Excess fat began to obscure his angular features, and his once sharp eyes now held the deep sadness of someone gradually being forgotten. But the heaviest sentence did not come from critics or the police, but from his own home. In 2012, the fortress at Nana Glen officially collapsed. The separation from Danielle Spencer after nearly 10 years of living together was a fatal blow. For many years, Russell lived the life of a global brand. He moved from continent to continent, from naval battles on the Surprise to the bloody boxing rings of Cinderella Man. He was so busy building legends for the world to see that he forgot to build memories for his own children. There is a costly truth that Russell once confessed. In the most luxurious 6-star hotel rooms in the world, he would often wake up in the middle of the night and not know where he was. And worse, he didn't know how much his children had grown since he last saw them. The price of being a general in real life is absolute loneliness. In 2012, when Danielle walked out of his life, Russell learned a bitter lesson. The Oscar statue is very cold. It cannot warm him when winter comes. Fame gave him all the money to buy a large ranch, but it took away his reason to return there. The years after the divorce were a long, painful silence, where Gladiator had to learn to face the truth that he had won the world, but lost the battle to keep what was most precious. From 2015 onwards, the world began to witness a strange change in Russell Crowe. The tabloids no longer published photos of him dressed elegantly in a suit on the red carpet, but instead showed images of a fat man with a scruffy beard, wearing a faded t-shirt, sitting alone in a corner of a farm. The crowd began to mock him. They said he was past his prime, that Maximus is now just a fat man with a big belly. But to a keen observer, this was not abandonment. It was a cleansing of the soul. Russell had decided to stop playing Hollywood's game. He gave up trying to maintain his godlike image and entered a phase that I call the era of raw truth. He accepted his aging, heavier body as the price of time and the scars he no longer wanted to hide. His roles during this period began to take on a dark and suffocatingly heavy tone. In Unhinged 2020, he played a psychopath driven to madness by being cornered. Audiences shuddered at his ferocity, but few realized that Russell was using the role to confront his own demons of anger that had haunted him for decades. He was no longer acting. He was pouring all his frustrations, arrogance, and past mistakes into the camera. Every scream on film was a moment of self-dialogue about what he had lost. But the real turning point of salvation did not lie on the film set, but in the blazing fires of 2019. When the Great Fire burned down the Australian countryside, while the super-rich fled to safety, Russell Crowe chose to stay. He held his ground at his Nana Glen farm, directly facing the scorching heat to protect every tree, every animal, and his family's memories. There is a valuable story that locals still recount. Amidst the thick black smoke, people saw the Oscar-winning superstar, his face smeared with ash, holding a hose and fighting death not for his possessions, but for his connection to his homeland. That was the moment when the gladiator's iron armor truly fell. He realized that dozens of golden statues or hundreds of millions of dollars could not stop the power of nature, and the only thing worth fighting for was what belonged to his roots. In 2021, another blow struck his heart. His father, John Alexander Crowe, passed away at the age of 86. For Russell, this was not just the loss of a loved one. It was the collapse of a monument, the last anchor holding him to reality. Russell was with his father in his final moments on the flight from Sydney to Coffs Harbour. He held the frail hand of the man who had spent his life serving meals to the stars, only to realize that he himself was the brightest star, but also the one who owed his father the most. Standing before his father's coffin, Russell was no longer the illustrious General Maximus, nor the genius John Nash. He was just a 57-year-old man with white hair, seeing his own reflection in the finiteness of life. He realized that the years spent conquering Hollywood, the all-night parties, and the arguments that filled the pages of newspapers were just fleeting shadows. His father had lived a quiet life behind the scenes to let his son shine, and now, while the spotlight still shone on Russell, the one who had guided him was no longer there. From that moment on, the fierce gladiator seemed to have truly laid down his weapons. The hot-temperedness that once terrified the media vanished, replaced by a calm contemplation. He retreated to his Nana Glen ranch, where he began a journey he called cleansing his soul. Some mornings, people no longer saw a dapper Russell Crowe on the red carpet, but a fat, unshaven man in a faded t-shirt sitting silently in a corner of the garden. The crowd began to mock him, saying he was past his prime or letting himself go. But Russell just smiled indifferently. He began using social media in a very different way. Instead of responding to critics, he shared the sound of birds singing at 5 a.m., the beauty of a strange tree that had just bloomed on the farm, or the simple joy of seeing his livestock well fed. He found salvation in the tranquility of nature, where fame and money meant nothing in the face of a passing breeze. Russell began painting and playing music, but not to sell or to seek any other award. He painted to capture moments he had previously been too busy to see. He played music with his old friends in The Gentleman Barbers, singing about past sorrows and lingering hopes. There is a little story that, on quiet nights at the farm, Russell would often sit alone with his guitar, humming melodies his father had loved. It wasn't a performance. It was his way of talking to the deceased, his way of healing the scars Hollywood had left on his soul. At 61, Russell Crowe stands amidst the lush green fields of Nana Glen, where the sound of wind rustling through the trees is the only thing breaking the silence. No more flashbulbs, no more frenzied cheers from the Roman Colosseum, and no more raging fires consuming the newspapers. The once famous Gladiator is now just a man with silver hair, quietly picking up the fragments of time. Looking back on his brilliant but stormy journey, his greatest regret was not the stumbles in his reputation or the million-dollar contracts that were turned down. It was the silence in the luxurious hotel rooms, where he had everything but no one to hold. He realized that Hollywood's glory is like a drunken haze, dazzling at first, but leaving a bitter aftertaste upon waking. The Oscar statue may bring recognition from the world, but it can never tell his son bedtime stories or warm him as his loved ones gradually drift away. The lesson Russell Crowe leaves us with is a stark truth. The pinnacle of one's career can sometimes be the lowest point of one's soul if we forget simple value. He spent his whole life playing heroes who saved the world, only to realize in the end that all he needed was to be a proper father and son. His salvation did not come from any other award, but from accepting his own imperfections and cherishing every quiet moment under the trees and among the grass. So what about you? When you look back on the journey of a king who dared to give up his crown to find himself, what do you feel is most important? A monumental legacy with timeless films, or a peaceful afternoon with family, free from the clamor of fame? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We will continue to uncover the hidden corners and raw souls behind the glamour of Hollywood legends in the next video. Like and share videos with your friends and family. Goodbye, and remember, life has no do-overs, so cherish your own story starting today.